we turn our attention to the Sudan, where a war between the army and the rapid support forces has created a devastating humanitarian crisis and displaced millions of people. The conflict has also raised wider questions about Sudan's political future, the role of civilian forces, and the impact of regional and international actors on the country's as part of the country's crisis. Today, we also look at the journey that brought Sudan to this point, from the 2019 revolution and the attempt to establish civilian rule to the 2021 military coup and the outbreak of war 2 years later. For more on Sudan's political transition, the war, the search for peace, and what lies ahead for the country, we're joined now by Khalid Omer Yousif, a former Minister of Cabinet Affairs and prominent civilian political figure. Very good morning to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Very good morning to you, and thank you for having me with you today.
I just want to start with the framing of where the Sudan is now, or where its political fortunes lie. Obviously, the introduction is a conglomerate of what has happened, but is it correctly framed, in your view, when we talk about where and what the Sudan is today?
I think Sudan is not understood in a very good way globally. There are many who are looking for the conflict in Sudan as a struggle between two generals. Also, there is more focus on the humanitarian impact of this conflict, which is huge. Sudan is the biggest humanitarian crisis on earth now. But this is not enough to understand the nature of the crisis, and as well to help the Sudanese to end this war and achieve peace, because it is a deep political crisis started after the independence of Sudan, the failure to manage the diversity in the country, the interference of the military in politics, the role of fanatic groups like the radical Islamists of the NCP, how they oppressed the people. So, all these elements together created the mess that we are living in today.
And it's interesting that you say that it is dominated by the humanitarian crisis, that it's not, the only picture to paint about the Sudan. But I mean, when one looks back at what we spoke about 2019, what we see as the civilian project, it collided with the real power structure of the Sudan, and people are still finding themselves in dire straits. We're still talking about conflict. We're still talking about vulnerable people being attacked. The contestation for power between the SAF and RSF does have a human face to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in 2019, the Sudanese people, they made their aspiration very clear. They wanted to end it at 3 decades of authoritarian rule of the NCP. They wanted to end the military rule in Sudan. They wanted to start a new future for the Sudanese, where there will be a more inclusive framework of governance that can embrace the diversity of the different Sudanese societies and activists. These dreams has been killed by the two military components that they are fighting right now. And they made the coup in 2021. They went to the war in 2023, and now they are causing an immense suffering for the Sudanese people everywhere in the country. Of course, the humanitarian impact of this war is huge by numbers: more than 14 million displaced, more than 25 million in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian crisis need to be addressed. It is not a choice for the warring parties to allow the humanitarian delivery. It's obligation by the law, the international law, the regional law, the local laws, and there is an importance for coordinated treasures over the warring parties to allow the humanitarian access and to provide the protection of civilians and those who are stuck amid the war. Again, the humanitarian aspect need to be addressed urgently, but understanding the root causes of the problem will provide the way forward to a sustainable peace and the cycles of civil wars and instability our country lived during the last 7 decades.
Okay, so you were a student activist. You became the Secretary General of the Sudanese Congress Party at just 28 and were very much an important part of the Sudan's 2019 revolution. What did they get wrong? Was it a case of inviting civilians to the table but not giving them control of the table?
In 2019, as I said, the people of Sudan made it very clear. They wanted a transition from authoritarian to democracy, from military rule to civilian rule, from civil wars to peace. And of course, the situation was not easy at that time to end these long decades of military rule and start and open a new page is not an easy mission. It was, there are very huge pressures and challenges facing the civilians at that time. And many believed that an agreement between the civilian and military can facilitate a peaceful transition and allow for a free and fair election where the Sudanese people can choose. But the experience proved this idea wrong. The military, instead of cooperating and facilitating the transition, they showed that still they want to keep the power within their leaders. They want to keep the privilege and the resources that they are acquiring because of their political engagement, and they were not serious in allowing a democratic transition. So I believe after this experience, now there is more clarity about the future of Sudan. There is a need to end the military rule. There is the need to end the war, firstly, of course, immediately. But ending the war as well should be linked to ending the military rule and starting a civilian democratic transformation. This can provide the sustainable peace in Sudan because oppression and violence cannot be a source of stability.
I'm sure you would agree with me that the stakes are high, though, given what the United Nations has described as Sudan having created a war economy. And we're looking at here how the war continues to have territory, trade routes, and commodities that are also helping finance the conflict. That surely says that it's going to be a very difficult task to dismantle the existing architecture, but also ensure that there is fairness in the distribution of the wealth of the economy.
Of course, this is an important aspect of this war. This is not just war about power; it is well war about resources, and there are very shocking statistics about how the national resources of Sudan are being used. For example, last year, the EU reported that both sides are smuggling gold outside of Sudan, and they estimated the SAF smuggled gold in around $1.6 billion, and the RSF around $1 billion. These resources are national resources, and they are not renewable resources. And instead of using the resources of the country in building a better education or a good health facility or creating jobs for the Sudanese people, these very limited resources are being used to destroy the country and to prolong the war. They are benefiting few actors inside and outside Sudan, and they are destroying the lives of millions of Sudanese. So the war economy is a very important angle of understanding the crisis and, of course, addressing the issues that need to be addressed to achieve peace in Sudan.
And we are speaking, at least from a listener's view's perspective, it sounds very abstract. If you could just break down the complexities, then, if we are saying that the military forces or the fighting forces have become economic empires, then just also talk to us through about the genesis of how we came to this, because the international conversation focuses on the RSF, on the SAF, but I'm sure there are deeper fractures, and in fact, they've shown themselves to be such that we're not just dealing with two armed forces. What went wrong?
It's much deeper than that, as you said, because the first civil war in Sudan started in 1955. And the essence of this war, the root causes of this war, that Sudan has been colonized by the British for long decades. They created a state that benefiting the narrow interest of the colonial powers at that time. And when the Sudanese inherited that state, instead of rebuilding and reshaping the state to be inclusive for the very diverse societies of Sudan. In Sudan, there are more than 500 tribes. There is more than 120 languages, more than dozens of religions and ethnicities. And this kind of diversity cannot be ruled by force. This diversity need to be embraced. This diversity need to be reflected in the state, and the different societies need to be represented in a fair way, and they get their share in power and in wealth and in development. And that was not the case. The military made their first coup in 1958, just 2 years after the independence, and instead of addressing the root cause of the first civil war that started in 1955. They are just repeating the same narratives of today, that they are going to achieve a military victory and they are going to crush the rebels. This widened the war, and because of that, that war took 18 years till 1972. Then the second civil war started in 1983. It took 22 years, and it led by the end to the separation of South Sudan. The third civil war started in 2003. It took 17 years. It led to the genocide in Darfur. So the accumulation of all these civil wars remain many issues not addressed properly. The issues of governance, the issues of managing the diversity, the issue of the role of military in politics, and the issue of relation between religion and state. All these issues has not been addressed, and all these issues, many actors tried to solve it by force, by gun, to impose a unilateral vision. I think the big lesson learned that from this war, that gun cannot solve the problems of Sudan. Problems of Sudan need peaceful settlement. And a peaceful settlement, that means addressing the root causes, ending the military rule, starting a democratic civilian transformation, embracing the diversity of Sudan, and have a strong federal system, solving the relation between the religion and state, and ending the legacy and dismantling the empowerment and the control of the network of the NCP over state institution, to end the state capture and make the state really representing the Sudanese, not a narrow fanatic group.
And how would that play out? Because you have experience in government as a Minister of Cabinet Affairs under Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, but you were also later detained following the 2021 military coup. So it must be, as you say, more than just an exchange of state actors. We see General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan offering temporary immunity and legal, political, and security guarantees for participants in a national dialogue. There has to be accountability and acknowledgement, as you say, of those huge fissures, and also who gets to decide who has what, who owns the economy, who owns the land, who has the right to speak out.
This is the dark comedy, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan was part of the forces that committed the genocide in Darfur in 2003. He was one of the leaders of that genocide. The Fattah al-Burhan killed the people in 2019 in front of the military headquarters. The Fattah al-Burhan stayed the coup in 2021 and killed more than 200 protesters in the front of the palace. The Fattah al-Burhan and led the country for the current war, where tens of thousands of Sudanese are being killed and millions are being displaced. So he is not in a position to give impunity to anyone. He doesn't have the moral authority to speak about pardoning the civilians. Actually, his crimes need to be documented, and he should be accountable for that. A serious political process in Sudan cannot be dominated by any warring party. It should be independent. It should be civilian-led, and it should be represented in a way that not give the warring parties or the old regime the upper hand to shape the future of Sudan. They already destroyed the past of Sudan. They are already destroying the present of Sudan. They should not be allowed as well to destroy the future of our country. That's why we believe that political process should be civilian-led, and it should open a new future for Sudan, not legitimize the status quo that has been created by the war.
So, how do you ensure that if we are talking about reform, that the civilian movement has some level of coercive power, and by that, the agency to be able to ensure that there is a sustainable transitional government?
I genuinely believe in the resilience of the Sudanese people. They made many things that look impossible before they made it possible. That was very well manifested in 2019 revolution. Globally, there were not too much actors believed at that time Sudanese people can end the brutal 3 decades of the rule of Omar al-Bashir. And the Sudanese people proved the world at that time wrong. And I believe they are able to make it again. The history showed us that Sudanese people ended the military rule in 1964, in 1985, in 2019. They rejected the coup in 2021. This war has a major objective is to kill the aspiration of the Sudanese people to make their country free and to decide their future without the influence of the gun. I believe this project, this evil project, will fail, and the Sudanese people will prevail. Still, there is a very strong civilians movement in Sudan. It is very diverse. There are political parties, there are trade unions, civil society organization, prominent figures, youth groups, women groups, all of them are working together toward ending the war and shaping a democratic future for Sudan. The war and the warring parties try to squeeze the civilian space. I believe they are failing, and the civilians are coming together, and they are very determined to end this catastrophic war and open a new window for the future in Sudan.
Mr. Khalid Omer Yousif, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Former Minister of Cabinet Affairs in Sudan's transitional government, speaking to us about the country's current political journey, the war, and the search for a peaceful civilian-led future. Brings the time to 8:30. Let's take you back for a final news update from Shalani Tulo Mwebe.
SABC News.